Joining the conversation, we have NBC News national affairs analyst and a partner and chief political columnist at Puck, John Heilemann, and member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. It's very good to have you on the show this morning. I want you to comment, if you could, on Michelle Obama's speech, but also perhaps more on exactly how women right now perhaps might be, first of all, the savior of this country, but also the vessel, the example of what Donald Trump is able to do, what he has done already, the damage he has done, so that perhaps people can understand when he's making a threat, when he's normalizing something like January 6th, it's important not to get tricked or not to think he's kidding, to believe him.
Well, you know, in terms of Michelle Obama's speech, what I found to be so resonant and so effective is how much she spoke not only for women, but how much she was speaking to men and to the men in our lives who love us. And in a time right now in this cycle where there's a lot of gender division happening in our political process right now and the polarization along lines of gender, especially for young people, to make that direct appeal, because women are a very powerful force in U.S. politics right now. They're a decisive force, but we also cannot do this alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I brought up that traumatized husband. Sam Stein, you have the next question.
Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate you being here. I'm sort of curious as just sort of a tactical political matter. I mean, you see those speeches from Michelle Obama, and you sort of ask, you know, should the campaign be leaning even harder into this idea that men specifically have a stake in the abortion debate, that this is not just about women, that men have a responsibility to understand they too can be impacted by a post-Dobbs world? And do you think there's a resonance that happens when Michelle Obama makes these comments where younger men specifically seeking to have a family, to have a child, recognize that the stakes are there? Or is this just one of those cases where you have a unbelievably historic gender gap and you live with it?
No, I don't think that we just live with this gender gap. I think we have a responsibility to talk to people and to educate and to make the case. And part of that means talking to men. We did this right after the Dobbs ruling in 2022 and saying this is not just a women's rights issue. This is an issue for men. And this is an issue for the fact that, as Michelle Obama said, when it's your wife, your girlfriend, your partner who is bleeding out and you are begging a doctor to save their life and they cannot, and if you have to walk home and raise a family on your own without a mother, that is a men's issue. And in these themes of masculinity, if we want to be leaning into them as well as the Trump campaign talks about doing, part of that is about protecting your family. And if you want to protect your family, part of that means voting for Kamala Harris and making sure that women's rights and our bodies are protected. And the first line of defense from ensuring that your wife doesn't bleed out while she's giving birth is making sure that she has the rights to make decisions over her own body.
So Congresswoman, last night, right here in New York City, your hometown, Donald Trump held a packed rally at Madison Square Garden, and a number of speakers used downright racist and offensive language, no more so than the so-called comedian who said that Puerto Rico was an island of garbage. Can you just give us your reaction to what you heard last night, just hours and hours of frankly, hate, and what, frankly, how it could electrify this electorate?
Well, there's a couple of things. As you mentioned, this was a hate rally. This was not just a presidential rally. This was also not just a campaign rally. I think it's very important for people to understand that these are mini January 6 rallies. These are mini Stop the Steal rallies. These are rallies to prime an electorate into rejecting the results of an election if it doesn't go the way that they want. Because Donald Trump and that entire cadre of people up on that stage, Stephen Miller, etc., do not respect the law of the United States of America. And they either want to win this election or they are using rhetoric of taking it by force. That is what they mean, and that's what they're doing when they are inciting violence and hatred against Latinos, against Black Americans, against Americans who don't have children, against, I mean, you have J.D. Vance literally talking about watering down people's right to vote, depending on if they can viably carry a child or not. We have to understand how unhinged this campaign has gotten, and the only reason that the rhetoric has gotten this far is precisely because they are trying to prime the kind of froth that led up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And so it's very important that we connect those dots. And right now, the campaign is scrambling, and they're trying to blame this rhetoric on a so-called comedian. This is not a comedian. This is the Trump campaign. They invited this rhetoric on their stage for a reason. It was a chorus of speakers on that campaign for a reason. It was vetted, and they knew exactly who was going to say what before they went on. And so the only backtracking that they're doing right now is just because tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans happen to live in Philadelphia, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, and also the several swing seats in the House of Representatives that run through the state of New York, and they're just realizing that they might have made a big error by saying out loud what they're thinking.
Let's be clear, politicians in Pennsylvania, politicians in Florida, Republicans, they're wildly trying to scratch back and apologize and move away from that. Mika, in any other political world, in any other political reality, after something like that was said, Democratic politicians, Republican politicians before Donald Trump on this level, they would have all condemned the hate speech. They would have all condemned the attacks against Puerto Ricans who are American citizens. They would have all done that. But what happened here? One speaker after another speaker after another speaker got up there and talked. Nobody condemned him. Donald Trump got up, didn't say a word about it. So you've got hours and hours of speakers saying more and more offensive things, holding up a crucifix and calling Kamala Harris evil and the Antichrist. But nobody says that what the comedian said was wrong. And by the way, Donald Trump knew by the time he went on stage the reaction he was getting. But he also knew, hey, maybe some bigots on the far right, maybe some angry young men will be motivated and think that's funny, and they'll be on my side. So Donald Trump, knowing what he said, knowing that Puerto Rico is called a floating pile of trash, Donald Trump remained silent. No, don't go, That's like, okay, Puerto Ricans, you know. Americans, you know. As you have to speak to your child this morning, to say that all Americans don't think that way, but Donald Trump does. The people that spoke after the comedian do. There was a very clear opportunity to mitigate the damage, and every speaker last night refused to do it.
This is what's called normalizing, normalizing hatred. And let's not mince words about what that leads to. That is the process that leads to fascism. Nobody, to your point, Joe, Katty K, nobody gets a pass at trashing America. Nobody gets a pass at talking like Hitler or fancying Hitler or calling our veterans or people who died for our country suckers and losers. Nobody gets a pass demonizing and degrading people. Nobody gets a pass threatening people except for convicted felon Donald Trump. Are we going to wake up?
I mean, it's what the other great thing about what Michelle Obama said over the weekend that I think a lot of women will kind of feel resonates with them was that how does he get a pass on so much and she gets held to this extraordinarily high standard on everything. And I think every single woman who is listening to that has been in a position, whether you work in a bakery, whether you work in a restaurant, whether you work in an accountancy's office, whether you work on Capitol Hill, I am sure, Congresswoman, or in a TV studio, we know exactly what that means. And Donald Trump does get keep getting these passes. Over the course of the weekend, another thing happened. I think some of the confidence you hear from the Trump campaign, I wonder whether they are setting themselves up for saying afterwards, listen, if we lose, it's not possible because actually look how well we were doing. And over the weekend, Elon Musk said that January the 6th, in no way a violent insurrection, but also perhaps more importantly said mail-in ballots are a recipe for fraud. Do you think that's what's happening at the moment?
That's absolutely what I think is happening. I think you see the breadcrumbs and the puzzle pieces that are being put together by the Republican Party right now. Even the way that they are dropping polls, the number of polls, the way that they are trying to outnumber Republican-skewed polls, and the way that they're undermining elections, mail-in ballots. We're also seeing a widely reported incident of a manipulated video about burned, an attack or ripped up ballots in Pennsylvania that was proved to be fraudulent. All of this is exactly a replay of what Donald Trump did on January 6th. We don't have to think about if this is what happens. This is their playbook that they have used that led to the deaths of multiple people on January 6th. This led to one of the largest attacks in American history on the American Capitol, on U.S. soil. And it was done by exactly this rhetoric. And so when the Trump campaign says this was just a joke, we're just bringing in a comedian, they joke their way up right up until the point that people have lost their lives.
So, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much for coming on this morning. We really appreciate your thoughts, your words, and coming in today. Joe.